Hi, Neely. Thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, Tim.
I'll start off with the question that I normally start with, which is what are the musical projects you're working on at the moment?
So right now, I'm kind of in between a bunch of different things. I guess my two main things right now is playing with Danny Elfman and with Death Clock, which seem to love scheduling things exactly at the same time. So that's been my year is kind of like figuring out, okay, how do we make this work? Um, and then in the rest of the time, when I'm home in Las Vegas, I do a Cirque du Soleil show that I used to be full time at. That's what brought me to Vegas, but now I kind of get to have the best of all worlds and get to do that part time every once in a while when I'm here. If I go on the road, it's not a big deal. It just I get to relieve somebody else who's doing a really, really difficult full time job. And then I got my own stuff, my music with my band that I've been playing for a long time and touring with that. So just working out the weaving of that schedule is the big thing. And it's so funny because it's like we have a break this summer, really, right? And then again, everybody's fighting over like one date in the calendar, and I'm like, come on, guys, like what are the odds? Like literally, but that's the way it is, right? Like it's a good problem to have. So we're that's the biggest thing is making that work.
And can you give a bit of background on how you got into music and playing guitar?
Sure. So I mean, I come from a big music loving family. I grew up with I'm the youngest of four, and I have brothers, and I grew up with in the 90s, but with classic rock and music that came from the 80s and the 70s because I had older siblings, older brothers. And so I was exposed to a lot of things, and it was very clear to, I guess, everybody around me that I liked music and I picked up stuff and I was humming it and, that kind of thing. And so uh, getting me into music and especially when I have a guitar playing brother was kind of like a natural thing when it was obvious that I was into it. So I started taking guitar lessons when I was 7 and was not serious about it at all, like any 7-year old, would be. And then when I was around 11 or so, I discovered extreme and pornography, and the rest of everything just kind of opened up for me. And that was my first experience with wanting to play electric guitar and wanting to play it because I liked music that had it in it, and that's how you express that music is you had to play it on guitar. I mean, I can only sing Nuno Betancourt solos so well. You know what I mean? So so that kind of changed the thing for me about whether I practiced or not, or whether I took it seriously, because that was the difference between like I should take a musical instrument because somebody said I would be good at it and I'm taking lessons and it feels like homework, versus like everything that I'm listening to all day long has this in it and I must figure out how this is done. So that was the difference.
And obviously, Nuno's an incredibly high standard.
Well, yeah. I know, and you know what? I think the good thing about having a guitar playing brother, I mean, it's not the only thing, obviously, right? But one of the biggest things is that I think I always had like the perspective of like this is not every dude, you know what I mean? Like this is a special thing. This is a high benchmark of technical sorcery at the very least, right? If we're just focusing on that part, like I was aware that that was not easy. So again, it's like I think I'm lucky because I always lived with a person who understood, again, the perspective of everything, and so like I wasn't foreign to the world of music or even the industry later on because of that.
It's quite interesting how there's a bit of a resurgence in discovering Nuno and rediscovering him at the moment.
Mm.
It's probably not a surprise because he's such a brilliant player if you know him.
And again, it's like as a fan and as someone who was like a childhood fan and kind of treated it, especially because I grew up in the age of the boy bands in the 90s, and like that was like one of the other things that I was into because the songs were so good and catchy and musical. And so I was an extreme fan the way that like an 11-year-old would be a boy band fan. Like I treated it as like that kind of like obsession almost, you know what I mean? So I learned a lot about everything about that band. And as a child whose favorite band had already broken up and I was never going to see them live and all that kind of stuff, it was like that little kid in me is like, I never thought I would get to like experience this renaissance as like a grown-up fan and just get to witness it and enjoy it and be like, wow, it's like my hero that gets to like carry I mean, not that he didn't carry the torch then, but like you're saying, it's just to a lot of people this is like almost a new thing. So to get to watch it was just like such a, I really like, I felt like the kid in me is like so fulfilled. I'm like, oh my God, I never thought I'd see this in real time, because I was always told about the early 90s and all that kind of thing.
I suppose Extreme also did have great songs and great vocal harmonies as well.
Absolutely. I mean, there's so many things in it, and a big range of musical versatility too, right? It wasn't the one hit wonder type of band that anybody thought it was when they were watching More Than Words or something like that, or even Wholehearted. Like you could, I think there are a lot of people that didn't really realize what this band was about until they dug in further.
Obviously, you mentioned Nuno there, but what were your other guitar influences?
So, Andy Timmons is a huge one from like my early days as well. Like I through my brother, I had a moment of getting into hair bands and all of them, and like again like being a good nerd who read all the liner notes and everything, but you know through Danger, I hate to say it like that, but that's how I discovered Andy as a little kid again, and in those early internet days we could listen to little snippets of his instrumental tunes that we couldn't buy, had no access to that stuff, especially living in Israel at that time. It was just like, well, if they ship internationally, we can wait a year and like maybe we'll still live here. But so it's just like really like you had to, God, it's like I feel so, I'm not an old person, right? But all of a sudden to be like, before YouTube, just searching for a music video, it was like the hardest, like if it was not out there. You couldn't just find that stuff like it is today. So like if you liked somebody, you really had to dig and really like find out about them. But yeah, I digress. Andy's a huge one for me. Then I got into Iron Maiden and all the rest of, the guitar art, and discovered the rest of my favorite players. And, I have a lot of influences, but if you want me to list like favorite guitar players as far as like big influences growing up, definitely, Andy was a huge one. Tony McAlpine and all those Shrapnel guys. Greg Howe is a huge influence, and then Steve Stevens, and then later Guthrie, and so the list goes on like any other player that you can talk to, and then yeah.
I mean, obviously you got to play with Tony McAlpine in his band. That must have been a big moment.
Oh yeah, and especially I was like really young, and it was one of my first gigs out of college, and I was just like I felt so like over my head, and he really calmed me down. Like he really had to not just take a chance on me, but also like take on the role of, I'm hiring someone that I'm gonna have to like chill them out to make this work. Like that's an extra job. Like usually if somebody hires you, you don't have to ask them to be like, okay, but also can you make me feel better about having to do this job? Right? So he was kind enough to really like take me under his wing that way, and like make me believe that I can play all that stuff and do that when it would really seem like an impossibility. But I guess that's how it happens sometimes, right? Is like you have to kind of sink or swim and grow into the situation and figure out if it's gonna happen. And I wasn't gonna not let it happen, I guess.
Tony's such a fantastic musician.
Oh God, yeah.
If he hadn't known you could have done it, he wouldn't have picked you.
I mean, that's what he would say, right? I thank you for saying that. But luckily, we're here telling the tale and with a happy ending, so to speak, or whatever.
You spoke a little bit about your time at college there. So where did you study?
So I went to Berklee College of Music in Boston, and I grew up in the Boston area as well. My family moved to Boston when I was 12, and so I had a really big shift in culture at that time. But by the time I did go to Berklee, uh, no, I mean my brother had gone. That was the reason for my family moving to Boston. Nobody had really expected my following in his footsteps, or anything like that. But the good thing about it was that by the time we got there, or I got there, I should say, um, I was it wasn't a foreign thing to me. You know, I was aware of kind of the inner workings of the school a little bit, and I knew some of the teachers. In high school, I'd taken some private lessons from some of the teachers. Like, you know, living in Boston and having a brother who went to Berklee kind of made me a little bit more familiar than someone who was going to go in from, you know, somewhere else. So I was, again, it was luck for me in that way, that I had this kind of given culture to be in since I was a kid, you know, and not everybody gets to have that.
That education must have prepared you for instance, the Danny Elfman gig.
You know, it's interesting. I mean, not to say it didn't, but sometimes it's not what you expect. Like what you think it's preparing you is like not all of a sudden it's not what you thought it was going to be. Like, for example, with bringing up Danny, my music school mentality would have taught me to expect that I would have to read well and quickly and do all those kinds of things, because that's what you would think when you're associating his work, right? Uh, but Danny's not that guy. Like, he's really a rock musician, you know what I mean? And so like he's much more comfortable doing things the way that a lot of us are, which is just sitting in a room together and like showing each other parts and listening to things and being like, I'm hearing that, and then that kind of communicative thing. And I would have never expected that, but you just never know who the person is going to be, you know? So is it the skills that I learned at Berklee in this particular case, or is it, you know, the years of uh learning things by ear that I did on my own that had nothing to do with Berklee? It just, you just never know what you're going to find, right? But hopefully the idea is that the school is kind of completing the picture and making you a comprehensive musician that is just able to handle whatever the situation is, kind of filling the gaps, hopefully.
At the moment, you seem to be incredibly busy. Obviously, you've mentioned Death Clock, you mentioned Danny Elfman, also the Cirque du Soleil. How do you balance those different gigs?
In every situation, you are a tiny cog in a giant machine, right? And so that's the stuff that it has in common that kind of like keeps the shifting from being impossible, you know? And I think musically, uh, it's easier now that I know all the set lists. Like, let's just be realistic, you know. It's like, it's at first, if you're just learning the set list for the first time, it's a lot of music to learn and everything. But over the years, you know, now that we've done some tour cycles, uh, there's not a lot of new stuff usually, you know. Usually you're not coming in learning, like, I mean, sometimes, but um, so now it's just a matter of keeping the stuff fresh and practiced. And again, it's like the more we work, the less you forget it. You know what I mean? Like when Death Clock went on tour this year, I think it was maybe 6 months after the last run or something like that, and I went and practiced the set kind of long after, you know, I hadn't touched it in some months, and it was all there, you know, like playing it live time after time. It's like you don't even have to try. Like, there's a part of it that gets into your body that like you can't ingrain it any other way like that. There's something about that, getting on stage and having to do it with nerves and with like real life circumstances around you and stuff, that like if you don't forget it, then it's really there.
The Cirque du Soleil gig involves costume changes,
Right.
trapdoors,
Right.
pyrotechnics,
Yeah, yeah,
as well as some very demanding playing.
yeah.
How do you spin all those plates?
Well, the good thing about that is that I have done it a lot. Like, because, you know, when you're there full time, that show operates 10 shows every week, 48 weeks a year if you're not sick or injured. And at that time, I didn't have a relief pitcher the way that I am to others now, uh, because luckily I'm local, so I can just come in and do that type of thing. But at that time, we were having a hard time finding somebody else who lived here and was able to do that every once in a while. And whatever, the show was in a different place, but it was just the show count that you get in that place without trying. I mean, it's ridiculous. Like, I mean, I think I've done like about 800 shows with them now, close to. And that's not even a lot over there, which is the really crazy part, You're working with acrobats that are like, this is my 3,000th like search, and like and they have short careers. They're like younger than I am. And they're about to retire. So it's like it's such a different world, but I think that's what keeps it really fresh. And honestly, like, yeah, the music is difficult, but again, having done it, it becomes just as autopilot as anything else. And it's not a lot of playing, like it's important solos and it's important parts and everything, and you're kind of like a feature role, but you're going on and off stage. You have certain numbers that you do and certain ones that you don't. So playing wise, it's not, it's not a lot of music to know for that show. Um, it is a different challenge to like come in and do it every couple of weeks on guitars that aren't mine, that I don't practice on, that I'm not used to, that are not even set up like, because I'm the backup, so it's not like they're going to really maintain that the same way. And so it's like, now that's an interesting challenge versus like being there every day and like trying to keep it fresh.
Almost like driving somebody else's car.
Oh yeah, it's weird. I mean, I always try to like really be kinder to myself about that, because whenever something happens, it's because of that, and I'm just like, how much can you blame yourself? I don't know. But
have you got any advice for musicians that are still learning their craft for how to prepare for different gigs?
So I mean, I think going back to that ear training thing is huge. I mean, just being prepared as much as you can. Uh, Obviously, for an audition, you can be only as prepared as what they're gonna throw at you. But once you've got a gig, let's say you have a set list to learn and everything, like being over prepared is really the best thing that you can do going into anything. Because doing your homework might seem obvious, but you just find that there's so many people that don't, and it's ridiculous. It seems crazy, and if you see how disappointing it is when you're hiring somebody, let's say, to play on your record or something, and you realize that like when that's what you're given back, it doesn't help you. So you don't want to be that person. You learn to, if you're literally there for them, that's the best thing that you can do, whatever that looks like, whatever your role is in that band. Like, how can you be there for the band leader and make them feel like they can count on you? Because it's gonna be the most stressful for them, and they don't want to worry about you. They want to like know that their band is trustworthy, and they can just like feel supported.
If you're not 100% with the parts, how are you going to hit a cue?
Exactly. It's like the parts are really only the beginning, right? So I find it's like funny to me that's even the benchmark. Like, that should be just the minimum. Or I guess maybe that's it. Like, you have to treat it like the minimum.
Can we talk a little bit about your gear now? Because obviously you're an Ibanez endorsee.
So, I mean, I've always kind of gravitated towards that type of guitar to begin with. And over the years, with the different gigs that I've had to play, it's amazing how much, not just the versatility from one guitar of theirs that I've been able to get, but just they've been able to provide for every single type of thing that I've done. And so, I mean, I think they're more versatile than people think about, or maybe more now, maybe people associate it more now with more versatile or different types of guitars. But when it comes to like, the classic 550, for example, that I'm seeing playing a lot, that's just something, it was like growing up, it was the guitar that I just kind of idolized and really wanted. It was just like this shreddy dream, you know what I mean? That was gonna, help me get to where I want to go. And whether or not that was, I mean, I never had that guitar growing up, it was just kind of like a thing that I wanted. And then I kind of started digging more into the brand, and I found that whenever I picked one up, it kind of was a little bit more conducive to the type of things that I was leaning towards playing. So I don't know, it just it's built for what I do, I guess.
And what do you use for amplification and effects?
So I'm a Mesa artist, and I've been using their Triple Crown for the last few years, mostly the 100 watt. And on some gigs, I do use some modeling things. I use the Headrush, have used the Headrush for pretty much since it's come out. And that's my fly rig. I have like a tiny MX5. I had a backup, exactly the same unit. They were both in my suitcase. That was my rig for an entire European tour. It worked great. We had not like, it was a clean stage. I do love amps and everything, but I will save my back if I'm the one carrying it. So I'm not, and their flights are a reality and all that kind of thing, so those are kind of my two worlds, and whatever I can make work, whatever the situation, whatever seems right for the situation is what ends up happening.
I mean, they seem to have reached the point now where the difference is so much smaller, especially going out front.
Yeah. I mean, I think as long as people know to kind of stand in front of the speakers and not to expect any stage volume, which I don't know how aware the average audience is of that kind of thing, but I think we're getting there. Like as the world is going to move more and more towards that side, for the most part, it seems like we're seeing so many clean stages now, uh, that people will have to figure it out.
I suppose it depends what else you're fitting on the stage, if you're fitting an orchestra on the stage as well as you.
Well, I mean, luckily, so I was gonna say, for those gigs, like I have been able to have that Triple Crown out on like every tour and everything that we've done, and I don't even take my own anymore because I was smart enough to build a studio on the second floor of my house. So I decided that this one's gonna live at home. But yeah, but I mean, again, it's just like when logistically the operation makes sense for it, and I just say like, hey, can we get this from this place, and somebody else carts it, and I see it the day of the gig or at rehearsal, a production rehearsal or something, then I'm like, this is amazing. But not every day is that day. So
I mean, some of those Alphaman gigs have been huge. Have you got any advice for aspiring musicians for how to prepare for those big, tens of thousands gigs?
I mean, what's crazy is like a lot of times it's a different I don't want to say they're not nerve-wracking, because they are, but it's like a different kind of nerve-wracking, and it's like a lot of musicians say, sometimes it is less difficult than the gigs to 40 musicians that are sitting right in front of your face. Like there is something to a large sea of people where it's just kind of like you lose touch with how, like, your eye can't comprehend like the difference between, I mean, I guess you can, between like 70,000 and 100,000, I get, but it's just like, to your perception of how it feels on stage, like the perspective starts disappearing after like a large enough sea of people, so the 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 jitters are different. Like you don't realize that you feel tiny in a really huge scenario. You don't realize you're on like huge screens and stuff like that. It's like that's the stuff you have to forget about, I think, to be able to do it. If you can kind of pretend that the person running around you with a camera is not standing like right there. But sometimes that distraction can really be helpful, you know what I mean? Because if you've gotten more, I've actually gotten more used to cameras right in front of my face before I was used to really large audiences. So in a way, sometimes the weirdest thing will desensitize you that you're not expecting. But I guess just looking for variables that feel familiar to you, it's still a gig, you're still on stage, it is the same thing, and so you kind of have to treat it like that and pretend it's not what it is. I think it's like the way to get through that, because then it's like really in hindsight you go back and you watch footage, or you see in perspective like how huge that really is, and you're just like, okay, yeah, like if you told me that then, I would have been scared.
Is there anything you're working on sort of stylistically or technically at the moment with your guitar playing?
Yeah, I less with the playing and more with the writing, I should say. I have written my next album. I'm demoed most of it, and I'm now kind of working on the next steps and figuring out what those are going to be, what the instrumentation or personnel is going to look like. But with that, I've kind of gone through a new sonic journey yet again, another album with different genres on it. You saw that, right?
No, what did you do?
Oh, did you miss it? He just like completely like stretched up, and like you could see his face. Oh man. And let me see if I can Micah. Oh, there he is.
Oh yeah, it's a beautiful dog.
He's a good boy. Thank you.
Yeah.
I lost my train of thought. Yes, yeah. And so like there's a lot of stuff that's gonna be kind of retro 80s pop, that washy synthy sound that's over everything right now. Um, there's going to be a lot of that kind of stuff, and then some other genres and things like that. And so, once again, it's like a new puzzle for me to figure out, just like my last album was. But I like that it's different and it's new, and I'm pretty confident about the material, and I'm enjoying working on it. So it's a good journey.
How do you sort of reconcile the two hats, as it were, in terms of being a session musician and also writing your own stuff?
Uh, I kind of always grew up with the idea of balancing those two things. And it was also kind of a career goal, I guess, because a lot of my favorite players and heroes that I grew up listening to had that sort of career where they had their own stuff, and then they went out and did the sideman thing. And I found out very, very early on that I felt, I don't want to say bored if I did just one thing, but that I liked to strive for versatility, and I liked to mix the bag, and that was actually kind of what made me happiest. And I was very lucky to find that out early on, because then I was able to work on it and get to the point where I feel confident enough to pursue different things. So now it's just like I've felt like that's the balance that I'm always seeking, because just working on other people's stuff is lovely and wonderful, but always feels like just part of the thing. And then like vice versa, like I go and play with my band, and I'm just like, I love you guys. This is a family. I don't want to feel like the band leader. I want to be part of a team. So it's just like those things balance out. But of course, I want to get my voice and my stuff out there as well. And so again, going back to your original question and the scheduling and everything, it's like trying to find balance in a life that's inherently unstable is it's almost like an unrealistic expectation. But maybe that's the practice, right? It's kind of like meditation. It's just like you're always practicing, trying to figure out like how to balance that schedule and make it make sense, and maybe just like accept that it's not going to be a perfect, if I'm juggling four things, it's not going to be 25% for everything. It just doesn't work that way.
Ends up being 100% for everything at the same time.
Yeah, pretty much. Or at least it has been this year. And now it's like I said, like my summer's slower, and I'm just like, so no one wants to utilize this time. All right, cool. Hey, listen, it's all good. I do have a record to put out, and I'm never going to get this time again. So if I'm lucky.
And that's when the phone will start ringing.
Exactly. I mean, I already know. That's why it's like, it doesn't matter when I'm working on stuff. When I work on my own stuff, I always feel like I'm stealing time. It always feels just like like some weird sort of playing hooky or something, as if it's not as significant as the rest of the stuff that I'm involved in. But it's just, we are always our own worst enemy.
And do you think that the internet is like a vital part of building a music career these days?
I think in a lot of ways it is. And I do like that you said the internet, because I don't know if it ends with social media and or just lives with social media. But I mean, I think it is. I think it's like a realistic part of the world that we live in these days, and trying to be 100% offline and have a working music. I mean, it's possible, but I mean, I get what type of musician are you trying to be? You know, like it's such a broad term, and there's so many different ways to pursue a career in music that maybe it's not a yes or no answer. I mean, you theoretically you could find a way to have a career in music in some way without existing online, but do you, does that help? I mean, you know what I mean? It's just like, I guess, I don't know.
It's almost like so much of the industry is there now, whether it's mastering or
I know.
online session.
I know it's crazy. It's like I kind of don't, I don't know why it's scary to acknowledge that for some reason, but it has been for as long as I've been working. So I can't, you know, maybe an older person will tell you something else. You know, it's like the perspectives are different, but I don't know anything else, even though I remember life before the internet.
My final question today is, if you have one piece of advice to an aspiring musician who wants to go out and make a career of it, what would it be?
I think to remember that it's a marathon and not a sprint. That was the thing that helped me the most. I I'm inherently an impatient person already, but I think at least in the time that I spent 5 years living in LA, and you know, I'm not blaming the culture of the place or anything like that, but I think during that time I felt a lot of expectation to be somewhere that I wasn't at a certain point in time, or you know, and I don't know exactly where that pressure was coming from, or whether it was from me or whether it was real or not. It doesn't matter. But I think as soon as I really learned that, and it was the same with, like, you know, when I was younger, I kind of accepted my strengths as my strengths, and I was like, oh, I'm, you know, I'm good at this kind of playing or this kind of writing, and I almost like just thought that I had to accept that that was the way it is, as if I'm done with learning at a certain point, or I'm going to die tomorrow and I'm never going to learn anything else. It's just like, you know, you do have the rest of your life for this, and it is a lifelong journey. And so I think holding on to that whole, like, this is a long game, it really helps in the day to day, for me at least, you know, because it can be really difficult to figure out how to piece a big picture together from like a day to day perspective. Like, how do you figure out point A to point B as you're living day to day? Like, you're just hoping that looking back, it'll look like something, right? So that definitely helped chill me out a little bit.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much for answering my questions today.
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. It was fun.